In this unit, I'll cover essentially memo writing 101. What memos are, how to write them, things to avoid when writing them, tips for getting started writing them. In other words, I basically teach you how to make an A on your memo assignments in this course in this video. Let's start off by addressing just what a memo is. It's a specific type of document, specific meaning that it has a standardized layout and set of formatting rules, and also a specific purpose, which is to update a tailored audience as to either the latest status of a subject or in response to some request for information or correspondence. They're generally formal ish in nature, but that doesn't mean that they are written in an overly stuffy or overly academic way. It just means that they are grammatically correct, relevant to the topic, they're written effectively and clearly, there's a level of professionalism. Let's look at some of the components of the memo layout one by one. A large part of this unit is addressing the format and visual design, more or less, of these documents that you'll submit. And this is just as much a PowerPoint on why design matters as it is why content and writing style matter. Memos are a visual medium, unless, of course, your reader is vision impaired and they're using assistive technology to consume your content. But for the majority of your readers, they're consuming your writing visually. And because memos are that visual medium, the way that the reader interprets the content and the ideas of the memo, it exists largely within the context of the reader's ability to physically and cognitively read and perceive the content of the memo. So things like paragraph indentations, bulleted and numbered lists, spacing, font choices, paragraph chunking are all actually really important to aid your reader in understanding and retaining the conceptual aspects of your memo. To that end, when making choices for things like bullet characters or fonts, as we'll see on the next slide, simpler is better. All humans have a limited amount of cognitive load, aka brain power, that they can process at one time. The more distracting or unconventional you make even small things like bullets, take away from the reader's brain power to understand your words and your message. Take, for instance, that top middle bullet with the four little diamonds that make up a bigger diamond. Your brain is going to needlessly spend energy parsing out those small details to understand what they are. Same thing with the top right. Those are little tiny 3D cubes that have a shadow. Your brain is going to spend energy processing that. So just keep in mind that bullets should just be a means to an end. They are a tool to parse out content into lists and sublists. The characters themselves, the bullet characters that are not important, so don't give them any extra weight than they need. And the other thing is, when you make choices that are less conventional, people do notice them. So my eyes are going to more easily and naturally glance over the simplest, most default, most conventional bullet, which is the top left, just round circle version, because I'm used to it and I've seen it so many times and I know what it is without really even looking closely at it anymore. But if you throw in stars or funny arrows, people aren't as used to seeing those because they're not as conventional, so they take away from your message again in that way. So, just to recap this slide, we want to avoid being unconventional and taking up brain space needlessly for our user. The same idea applies with fonts and color choices. The more unconventional or illegible your font, the more my brain has to work and focus on perceiving and understanding those letter forms over your actual concepts. So, as a rule of thumb, the main paragraph text or body text, whichever term you're more familiar with or whichever term may be in the assignment, should be probably size 10 to 12 is pretty standard. And your headings, which are like titles for your paragraphs, should be probably 12 to 14 pixels. And they're typically bold and they can even be a different color within reason to provide some additional contrast that says, hey, this is the separator, this is a title. The main body paragraph is this chunk of text below, but I'm a heading and I'm meant to stand out a little bit. Any color or text formatting or bolding of headings should just be distracting enough to serve its intended purpose to separate it from the body text. And it shouldn't take, again, that additional brain power or even just that additional attention from your reader. Here's an example of what I mean by headings taking up a reasonable amount of brain power or cognitive load without being too distracting. A bit of bolding and some meaningful, relevant, reasonable color difference isn't really hard to read. But if you make it shout too much on the right, we've got this pink. The reason that that's distracting is because it's not as common of a professional color to see, so it does stand out. Again, anything that stands out unintentionally or unmeaningfully is not something that we want for technical writing. I also see this type of formatting a lot too, which I would not consider this to be good formatting, where either the headings are unjustifiably large or they might also be this really saturated, bright, almost default blue color. And this might be a default color within the color palette of your word processing software. But hopefully, you can see for yourself that this is actually harder to read than a more reasonably sized, more muted, visually easy to consume color. And I've been talking about headings over the last couple slides. They are a different thing from headers. And I'm sorry that those two terms are so similar. I wish they weren't. That's just what each of those things is called. So, headers are the chunk of text that go at the top of your memo that is shown in the memo one time on the first page. It shouldn't repeat on each page and take up space on each and every page, just on the first page. But they always go in this order, at least for our memos. They go to, from, date, and subject, each on their own line. It's possible sometimes that date and subject are switched in terms of order, potentially for other TECM classes, but for our class, we'll just use this type of order and formatting. And you just basically type this information in normally like you would the rest of the content. And you just bold the labels of to, from, date, and subject because that adds a bit of that scannability and contrast in that information up there. So, as the reader, that information at the top it's shown at the beginning, and it's the header, and it's shown just once. And then the headings are basically titles or subtitles of the sections within your memo, whether that's one or more paragraphs that the heading might be covering. And they basically give a preview or they announce the detailed paragraph content that follows by almost summarizing what it's about or describing it or giving some other kind of indication of what the user or what the reader is about to read. Here's an example that you can find right in Canvas on how headings are visual tools that aid the reader in getting a glimpse as to what the full content is going to be about. So this is your Memo 1 assignment, and you get an idea of each of these major sections based on those green headings that precede the paragraph text. They're providing that preview, which is why you want them to visually stand out at a distance, because if my headings were just the same font as my paragraph text, even if they were the perfect words that did a great job describing those paragraphs, it would take, again, too much cognitive load or brain power for the reader to decipher where the headings end and the paragraph text begins. So we want that distinction visually. Now, for the header, again, that's just the to, from, date, subject area at the top. You should just type that in normally at the top of your document and have it only appear once. What you don't want to do is insert what Microsoft Word and Google Docs refer to as a header, either by double clicking in that top area or going to insert header. And I'll go over that in just a second. But that's what you don't want to do, because this is not only going to mess up your spacing, but it's also going to repeat the header on each page of your memo by default. If you take some advanced TECM classes and you know how to use these header functions in a little bit more advanced detail, that's fine. But for our assignments, we're a level 1500 class, and we're not going to spend that much time learning how to format these documents. So using anything like an advanced header function is just overkill for our class. So let me show you what I want to see in Microsoft Word. Here's a blank document. So here's a blank document. There's nothing in it. I'm just going to write to, from, date, subject. In a minute, I'm going to go over line spacing and whatnot, but I could say to Miss Hood, from my name, write the date and the subject. And inside of each memo assignment, it says how to format the subject line. So I want you to just type them in like that, and you'll mess with the line length and the spacing, and I'll go over that in just a minute. But what I don't want you to do is either do a double click, what I'm going to do here, click. Don't do this, because this is going to put this, anything you type up here, into every page, right? So as I have page 2, page 3, page 4, this is going to appear on all those pages. That's what we don't want. And then you could also get to that same thing by going to insert header and footer, insert header. It's going to open up that same section that I just had open by double clicking. So those are the same thing, but that's what I want you to not do. And I mentioned that just because for whatever reason, it could be that someone had to do that for a different class. And again, that's fine. I'm not saying that they're formatting it incorrectly. I'm just saying for our class, we want a very simple standard format, which is just writing it out to, from, date, subject. Moving back into the presentation. Now, pay close attention to these next few slides. I'm going to be explaining the concept of proximity as it relates to written documents and why proximity is important in these visual media, such as a memo. Headings should be closer to the paragraph that they go with or that they describe than the paragraphs that came before them. I'll say that one more time. Headings should be closer in proximity to the paragraph that they go with or that they describe than the paragraphs that came before them. Proximity is a concept used heavily in the Gestalt psychology movement that took place around the early 1900s that wanted to understand how the human mind perceives visual information. And it had some broader scope as well, but that's how it relates to our class. And there are a number of Gestalt principles, such as continuity, similarity, etc., that explain the way that objects are rendered and how that visually impacts how we think of those objects, whether they're related or not, whether they're similar or not. Proximity is the principle that says when things are literally closer together, we perceive them as belonging to the same group as opposed to other things. Even in this picture, we can tell which circles go together. And even if there was color applied, like purple and orange columns here, so we can see how powerful the principle of proximity is. And when things are closer together, people can tell that they go together. Let's see how this applies to a memo. On the left, we see headings that are really spaced out from the content that they describe, meaning that there's not enough proximity between these two related elements because the proximity is the thing that says, hey, these things go together. And in fact, on the left, actually all the proximity is the same between all these elements. So there's really no discernible difference for me to scan and see which things go together by just using that really powerful automatic principle of proximity. However, on the right, there are three distinct groupings, just like those column of circles that we just looked at. Because of increased proximity, we can tell that each heading goes with each paragraph that it's above. And there is intentionally less proximity from that second heading than the first paragraph that went before it. We don't want those two things to be just equally grouped together, such as other items on the page. We want those two things to be further away from each other or have less proximity to one another because they don't go together. Now, in Word or Docs or whatever you're using to write your content, you'll find that the default settings are going to produce spacing sometimes like we see on the left, or it's a little bit more spaced out. And we want to be more intentional and we want to correct this default spacing. So you'll need to actively fix that. And if you want, you can just do this one time for the first memo and then keep resaving that same memo over and over for all the other ones if you can get that formatting down. So it's not hard, but there are a couple steps. So pay attention now while I demonstrate to you how to address these default settings in Word and Docs so that you can intentionally have appropriate proximity between your paragraphs and your headings. First, I will do this in Microsoft Word. So let's say that for your memo, you were writing me about a status update or something for a project. So to Miss Hood from Junie Jones. Date, you could say January 1st, 2000, and subject project update status report, whatever. And now I'm just going to paste in some very simple paragraph text. Paste special, paste as unformatted text. So this is kind of what you're going to see. Now, notice how when I highlight this, when I highlight this heading right here, it automatically has like the spacing underneath of it. And that can be fine, but at the same time, I do think that we could better improve the proximity of these headings to the paragraphs that they go with by getting rid of this space. So I'm going to show you how to do that there and here. So I'm going to select all my text. I need to make my page a little bit bigger and go to this icon here. Has to do with, if you can look at this up and down arrow, this has to do with how far apart things are spaced. Line spacing options first of all, and say for before and after 0 point single line. Okay, line spacing is single, 0 point. That takes care of pretty much everything. And from there, you can kind of some flourish. Now, if you go with Microsoft Word's default heading 1 font, you're going to end up with something like this where honestly, that's a pretty big, sizable heading. It's size 20 font. That's bigger than our guidelines for our class. And it also does something funny with the spacing here. So instead of this, I'm going to show you a trick. I'm going to say that I want my font to be bold. Actually, do they? They think they make this in a black, but I'm just going to do bold. I think that's sufficient. And I'm also going to make sure that it's 14 pixels. And I'm also going to give it a rust color. Warm colors tend to stand out from black. a little bit more than cool colors, like you were to do a blue, which is totally fine if you want to do blue. You do have to go a little lighter though, because the darker your blues and your purples and things like that, the more like black it looks. So if you're going to do a cool tone color, kind of be in this mid range, or else there's really not that much distinction to be this mid range. But the warmer colors, you can afford to go a little bit darker and there's more visual distinction. So I changed my font size and my spacing is already how I want it. So now I go to styles, heading 1, I'm going to right click, and there's an option to update heading 1 to match selection, and look in the background of this dialog thing that I have open. Oh, it closed. Okay. Go back to this, open it up, and you'll see that heading 1 has been updated. All my heading 1s are going to have the same sizing and visual formatting that I want, the spacing that I want. You could always do a subheading in the same fashion. So let's say you're like next steps, and let's say I want to have another, I just need it to be maybe a smaller size, bold, and like a slightly, that's a little bit too fair to be visible. If it's too light, by the way, I didn't mention this when I was talking about color, but if you go too light, then you run into an issue where it's not very visible, the white background. You want to make sure that it's not too light that you can still read it off of the white page background, but it's not so dark that it doesn't stand out from your black text as a visual indicator. This would be like 3.1 or something. Or if it was underneath 3, it wouldn't be 4, because 4 would just be a regular heading. So something like this, right? And notice that my to from date subject is just, all I did was bold it. I kept it black. That is a memo convention. These do not receive any kind of color or special formatting like your orangey example here. Here's an example in Google Docs of the same thing. So I'm going to go to, for whatever reason, subject, blah. Okay. Make changes to the software every few years. So it seems like every couple years when I re-record this video, there's always something a little bit different, but ultimately the flow does not change. Actually, you can see here, I don't know if, I'm not sure if, again, that maybe this is an update to this software or what, but it kind of spacing the way that we want it to. But I will show you where to go in case it's not looking right. So let's say you highlight this, and actually you can tell, like I highlight the row of text, if I zoom in here, you can see that there is extra basically blue floating space above. And so basically what is happening is this platform is allotting extra space to this word. And so that's, or to that line of text. And so that's basically where our spacing is coming from. But we really want our spacing to come from our own entering, because we want to be able to control it. So let's just zoom out a little bit. I'm going to get rid of that spacing because we need to be able to control kind of what we want to see. So I've got actually my entire text highlighted. Go to Format, Line and Paragraph Spacing. So I'm going to go to Single for 1. And actually, I will say 1.15 is actually fine. Format, Line and Paragraph Spacing. 1.15 is fine, or single. You don't want to go to 1.5 line spacing or higher. That applies to Microsoft Word as well. That's fine. But I'm going to highlight just this one here because that's one where I can see that there is space, line and paragraph spacing, remove space before paragraph. So it's going to take me a few extra clicks than it did in Word because I was able to kind of in one fell swoop. It didn't work like that in here, but that's okay because I know how to do it. And again, once I've got it one time, I can just duplicate it and keep writing my memos. As long as you got it right the first time, I can just keep duplicating. If you become a TECM major or you have a design curriculum in some way for part of your major, I think going outside of this method is probably fine. But for our 15 level 100 course, this is a safer bet. I'm going to pick some random, let me go like a light slate color. It's a little bit too light because I can just tell that it's a little light on that white background. I'm going to make this so, okay, if this is size 11 font, generally you can go like sizes up. You know, that's kind of a rule of thumb. It's not like a hard law, but it is a good guideline. So because my general text is 11, that means I'm going to make my heading 13. So assuming we're not going to change any of the fonts, we're just going to go with this system default, which again, for the same reason as the bullet characters, going conventional is a safe play with the design of these documents, because if you choose something that is potentially less conventional, you may run the risk of that to you seems really readable, but if you don't really have much training in typography or design, I wouldn't take risks like this on your memos, because design of them is part of your grade, and that's what we're going over in this course, or sorry, in this unit. So, kind of a small tangent there about font. But feel free to change it if you feel like you have a reasonable substitution that is readable and professional. But anyway, now that I've got my heading what I would like, you can go to over here. There's a drop down called styles. I can click that. Heading 1, update heading 1 to match. That is the answer to the version of this that we did in Microsoft Word. Now what we can see that happened is my paragraph text actually was formatted as a heading. It's just that it hadn't been bolded. So I'm going to change this back to normal text. Sorry. There. Oh, wait, it wants to, hold on. Sorry. Troubleshooting live. Interesting. I don't know why it is not letting me separate. Okay, there you go. Just took a couple tries. It didn't want to separate these two separate paragraphs. I don't know why that happened, but we figured out a way around it. You could just make, let's say you were going to do a version 4, or I'm sorry, not a version 4, a section like we did before, and you just want to do something next steps. I don't remember exactly where I put the next steps last time, but this will work. So I'll bold it, but I won't make the font bigger, but I will make it slightly smaller and lighter. That's just kind of a pattern that I do with my heading styles. Not very common that you're going to have, like, beginner level documents, that you're going to have more than 2 levels of headings. If you're writing something really advanced, like a user guide or a manual or an annual report or something like that, then yes, you're going to have to figure out how to differentiate multiple levels of headings. But for our class, you shouldn't need more than 2. Most people just get away with 1 heading level. So this is just a slide iterating what we just looked at on how to customize the spacing of your headings, of your text. Another formatting thing you need to pay attention to is not just where your paragraphs start along that left edge, but also where the words of each line end on the right side. So what you want are paragraphs that are left aligned, meaning that each new line of text in the paragraph starts at the same invisible vertical line. And you want what are known as ragged right edges. So over here, my green check mark indicates that I've got ragged right edges, and that just means that the line naturally ends where it needs to based on, like, the length of the words in that line. You don't want something justified where it's forcing spacing between letters and between words to be unnatural, so that everything on the right ends up in the exact same spot. That's what we do not want. So justified spacing makes it so that each line of text is exactly the same width. But all of that extra spacing between words and within letters, it actually makes it less easy to read, and it decreases legibility for 2 reasons. Number 1, the extra space between words has been studied, and it's proven that it just decreases readability overall. It's more difficult. But then secondly, humans actually use the differing line lengths of text to help them scan down a paragraph. The fact that these are different line lengths actually kind of you keep your place within the paragraph and help you keep going down and not accidentally read the same line of text over and over. So they help you visually sort of track and keep place of where you are. When you are writing these memos, these icons that are in Word and Google Docs represent that paragraph alignment. So you want the one that looks like what I have selected here, which is where they all start in the same place on the left, but on the right, they end in different places. This is another one of the formatting things I need to mention. Please pay attention, because I always have, like, a handful of students that can't quite remember this one. Please don't be that handful this semester. But we do not tab in for new paragraphs for the first line of a paragraph underneath headings. And by tab in, I'm referring to this little space right here before the word said, this kind of Latin dummy text. Before this word said, I'm hovering over with my mouse right now these different tab spaces that we do not want. And I know that for English or for potentially other classes, they may have a format that they want or they may not care. But for our class, we want the headings and the paragraphs to all be left aligned, not just for readability, but also because this is just a convention of technical communication and of the memo genre. Some formats and genres, they have their own conventions like MLA essays, right? They have their own thing. So just like they have their specific formatting, this is another one of ours. So do not indent in for these paragraphs. We talked a little bit already about this, that we want our spacing to be single spaced. And like I said, single spaced or 1.15 is fine. 1.15 is also okay. We talked earlier about how to have helpful headings that aid your reader, and headings do kind of hand in hand with reasonably sized paragraphs. If paragraphs are too long, not only are you as the writer very likely not transitioning ideas very neatly to one another, but as the reader, it's not a fun task to read a giant paragraph. As humans, we tend to break down large tasks into bite-sized chunks. So by not having these giant paragraphs, this is another way that we're being sort of reader-centered. Now, there's no rule as to how big or small paragraphs need to be. In concluding paragraphs, they tend to be shorter than your main full body paragraphs. They might just be a few sentences. The body paragraphs that are really addressing the prompt, they tend to be a bit longer. And even if you have a lot to say about a certain topic, and even if it all lives within one heading, you might have multiple paragraphs underneath a heading. That's completely fine. Something to keep in mind if you're standing back and you've got these really massive, long paragraphs, just like this, for example. So you can see here you've got 3 paragraphs actually on the left. They could all be sitting under the same heading. And you can see for yourself just how long it is. This is an assignment that someone was submitting. And as you can see, you can probably understand that how I would keep losing track of where I was, but also the content, the ideas themselves here, a little bit of a jumbled mess. And is it possible to have really great writing hidden underneath one giant paragraph? Yes, absolutely, it's possible, but it's not as likely. So I think that not only is having the chunked paragraphs easier to visually see, but it helps you write better paragraphs. Bulleted and numbered lists are really helpful tools for helping your readers scan, but they should be used very intentionally. Bullets work best when you're grouping several related items under a category, but numbered lists are more effective for things that follow a chronological order, like a recipe. And these formats definitely help, but they shouldn't be in every paragraph, and they should never appear in introductions and conclusions. Your memo should read as a cohesive narrative, and it shouldn't mirror the bulleted structure of the assignment prompt on Canvas. So in Canvas, you're going to have a memo prompt just like this one, and it's asking you to reflect on the following, in this case, these questions. But what I don't want to see in your memo is just like however many like bullets, call and response answering. These memos still have to be presented as a flow of ideas that do need to hit on all the prompt questions, but it shouldn't just be like a list like at a time. Numbered lists are great to use and numbered lists, but they are tools that should be used sparingly and meaningfully, I'll say. I mentioned just a second ago to make sure you have an intro and a concluding paragraph. It's required for our memos to have an intro and a concluding paragraph, but they don't have to be very long or overly complex. But in professional writing, which is what we're practicing, some kind of context or even greetings is expected in that kind of written communication, like if you were writing your boss or in this case, your instructor. So that's why we have that intro paragraph, and it either directly or indirectly addresses the assignment. Like you can say, in this memo, I'm going to reflect on you told me to reflect on. Or in the second bullet on this slide, you could say the topic of this memo, in case it's AI, is introduced, but you might not you might not reference the assignment specifically. You might just come up what the assignment is about. I'm fine with either so long as it is a proper introduction to the content of the memo. And then for your conclusion, there's also a repeatable formula here where you start off the conclusion paragraph by referencing or summarizing up what your main body paragraphs are about. And then typically a good way to end these, especially if you're like not sure what to write, here's a freebie. Here's some free words for you. Thing about the reader for reading, as this is a common component of workplace communication, and you can make that very last sentence some kind of call to action. I'm not picky about what that is, but you could make it something along the lines of, if you have any questions about my memo or would like to further discuss XYZ, please reach me at email or whatever. So just always be sure to include those intro and conclusion paragraphs. I'm going to switch gears to talk about something a little bit more at that micro level. Your sentences should have some sort of diversity in them in terms of how long or short they are. It's not that they have to alternate every other sentence, like one long, one short, one short. There's not a rule that says how long or short they need to be. But the reason that I put this in here is because it's a common issue I see in technical writing 1500 memos. I see a common issue that some writers might face is having like complex after a sentence after another one, and they're all strung together. And similar to the paragraph that's too long and it's a little bit mentally exhausting to read. That's what reading too many complex sentences in a row is like, because people don't talk that way. People don't converse that way. And that's also so do your reader a favor and make sure that you have varying sentence lengths. This is kind of a little nitpick, but this slide is talking about something really odd that I sometimes see in technical writing memos. It's where people are clearly doing a little bit of copying and pasting, which I'll give the benefit of the doubt. They may be copying from one software to the next, or even their phone to then their computer. Like, I give the benefit of the doubt and say that it's not necessarily plagiarism. But you can see on the left, it's very subtle, but I can see it. So if you look at this top left, it's kind of dark blue. And again, I've just read so many memos and I've been doing this for a long time that to me it's very obvious. Like, I see it right away. But then this bottom one like concludes my experience, blah, blah. Probably there's a copy and paste conclusion that they're using where they were just modifying what they need to for each assignment, which I'm fine with, by the way, because I already mentioned the conclusion is really not, it's really more of a convention than it is new, meaningful information, right? But I can see here that for whatever reason, like, got a in one memo, you've got a paragraph text that's blue and a paragraph text that's black. That's not professional. And I know that it's minor, but at the same time, you're writing for your college instructor. You can even pretend that you're writing for your boss at work. Little things like this do take away because it stands out pretty clearly. So with these two, if you may not catch it, but if you are doing some copying and pasting or like in different chunks of like phone, your iPad, your computer, like, do a select all and make sure you change the colors to be what you want, because we don't want to see this mismatch. We see another example of the same idea but with font, where someone did some copy and paste, and that's the only way you're going to see this kind of is because of copy and paste, which again, I'll give the benefit of the doubt. I'm fine with the idea of copy and paste, but you then as the writer need to go through and make sure that like there's all one font and you don't have like a font sandwich going on for your sentences. If in case you're not seeing what I'm talking about is where it says, "This concludes my reflection," is in kind of Times New Roman style font. And then it says, "On why I believe technical communication is important for business and consumers." That is a different font altogether, kind of Arial maybe. It's also a larger size. And then it goes back to that first Times New Roman smaller size for the next one. Keep an eye out if you're doing a bunch of copying and pasting. This is on you to make sure that it is to be turned in by the time you turn it in. And now I'm going to give you 2 tips for writing these memos or really any other writing-based task or assignment. I've talked a lot so far in this lecture about the very tactical side of formatting the memos, and that is very important for the reasons that I mentioned about memos being a visual medium and humans being hardwired to perceive things a certain way via certain principles and only being able to compute so much information at a time. But just as important as your abilities to follow these guidelines as I've laid them out is also your ability to write in a way that is not only grammatically correct, but it's also compelling and natural and understandable and clear, and it meets the assignment criteria. So, as this is an online asynchronous course, it has its own specific purpose that is not about writing, like tips for grammar and things like that. It's about jobs in the tech field and how they work together and software development. Got over 70 students enrolled in this course, so I can't provide one on one tutoring for students who might need a little bit of extra help with writing. So that's why I'm presenting these 2 tips to help get you started, in case that's an area where you would like to improve. If you really struggle with getting started or dread writing assignments, my second biggest tip is to just start typing word salad. You automatically will just have thoughts that generate in your mind as a response to the assignment prompt. Like, you can't stop your mind from working. So your mind is going to start generating things. And also, the earlier that you read the prompt and start thinking about it, the more you can kind of ruminate on it things like going to bed, things like a walk around campus or doing whatever it is, just going about your normal day, the prompt will kind of its way into your subconscious and you'll kind of about things that you want to mention when you get to this assignment. So think about it and ruminate. So you're not just doing it all in the last like hours that it's due because you just don't have the same time to like your ideas breathe and stuff will just come to you that surprises you. But going back to what this slide specifically is talking about, really just to start getting this word salad out on paper. And it doesn't really matter how sloppy it is because no one's going to see it but you. So think of this exercise as like an outline or even a storyboard. Just let the ideas flow onto your paper because often our biggest enemy in writing and so many other things too is just getting started and seeing the blank sheet of paper. So once you vanquish that blank paper, as you come back with ideas to flesh it out, the eloquence and the really thought provoking or compelling points will start to emerge like more easily than if you had tried to write at that same level but like chronological order in perfect sentence structure from start to finish. And if writing is a strong point for you and you've got a way that works, go with that. But this is really a tip for the folks that you dread these assignments. And even though our memos are only 500 words, which is really not too long, and the assignment prompts are long enough that it's pretty easy to make that word minimum. This is really more so a tip for those folks that really feel like they're not good at writing and they hate writing. Even people who do like often just kind of that automatic, almost like jump start to just get the ideas on paper and get rid of that blank sheet. But my actual biggest tip is to just write it far enough in advance that you have time to put it down and come back to it. So similarly to how I just mentioned, like read it and let yourself think about it. Same idea applies, but actually having it written and try to get it as to turn in as possible a couple days before it's due because every time you come back to it, you'll have something else to polish or make it better or change up so that something flows more easily. But we just need time away from our writing to be able to identify maybe when things sound off or when sentences are a bit jumbled or confusing. And if you don't read your work aloud, and again, this is more so for people who maybe avoid writing because they feel like they're not good at it. If you don't read your work aloud, you're never really going to know what it actually says. If you skip over like the actual words and you just kind of skim it, you're going to not realize that maybe you have written something down that actually doesn't sound maybe that natural and could be rephrased to be maybe more either at a collegiate level or even just like maybe more clear and intelligible to someone else other than the writer. So, our memos, there is an expectation that you're writing them professionally using correct grammar, but they aren't research heavy. They are meant to be from your experiences and how the course content is shaping your perspective. So, know that our memo assignments are wanting you to reflect on your experiences, and there really isn't much practical room for an assistive technology like ChatGPT that I can honestly think of. But I think due to students like not getting that couple hours to writing this in the 2 weeks that they have, they wait to that last minute. And so they just kind of the chat gpt the prompt and it spits out something like this for memo, the technical communicator memo, and it just doesn't make any sense and it has nothing to do with what we're actually trying to learn in that unit. Yes, that this student did receive a 0 for turning this in and did not argue that grade because it was pretty obvious to everyone that this was not their writing. So the TECM Lab is a great resource, but they're going to help you with things like Microsoft Word, Google Docs. They can't help with style, or content, or grammar. And they do remote tutoring if you like can't get to the TechCom Lab on the main UNT campus. While I wouldn't say the formatting for our memos, I wouldn't say it's hard, but I would say that it is specific. And I do grade on the points covered in this lecture and making sure that you can replicate like readable memos. So if you feel like you can't abide by what we've addressed in this lecture, do maybe seek help from the TechCom tutors. The second resource, though, is the Writing Center, and I've already plugged both of these labs, but we're going to get 10 points extra credit by booking a one-on-one session with them. Review the Lecture 1 video if you need a little more details on how that extra credit session works. So again, I just really urge you to take advantage because you're going to get 10 points extra credit, but also your memo will be better. So like it's win-win. But to receive that extra credit, you're going to have to submit proof of your writing lab visit as that last page. And again, we talked about what proof might entail in the first lecture video. So just review that if you need to. One of the last things is very obvious, but like make sure you read the prompt well. This is a tip I wouldn't think I'd have to say, but it does appear that there's a couple folks that don't actually read the assignment prompt. So I'll just mention it in case it helps remind someone this semester to actually read the assignment and make sure that you're answering everything that it's asking you to go over. Something else I wouldn't think I have to mention, please make sure you upload the correct file. I know we all make mistakes and you're juggling like a bunch of stuff, this course, your other courses, but if I message you and say, hey, this isn't the right one, and it's not until after the due date that we realize it and that you submit the actual right document, that document is late. So there will be a point deduction. The full rubric is available on Canvas, so please be familiar with it so you don't lose unnecessary points. And I have a template provided as well that has all the proper spacing and alignment in place. You don't have to use it at all, but it's there for you if you want it. And that covers it for this unit, how to write a memo for TECM 1500. As always, please email me or message me on Canvas if you have any questions, or come to my office hours and ask any questions that you may have then. Thanks.